Welcome to another Pokemon Professor Review. Look who's flopped up on shore. We got a little Magikarp joining us to help us with equation structures. Now, we've talked a lot about equations. We even did some work with inequalities, and a lot of what we're going to discuss now applies to both of those situations. There are specific vocabulary terms that we give to what's going on in this equation, the parts of this equation. There are actually three parts to this equation. The parts are separated by the addition symbol and the equal sign. So addition symbols and equal signs separate equations into parts, and we call these the terms. These are known as the terms of an equation. And this equation has three terms: 3x, 6, and 9. Now from these terms, we need to be able to clearly talk about the numbers that are in this equation. So we have two vocabulary terms that we use called coefficients and constants. Within our equations, at least at this point, at this level of math, when you reach higher level of math, there may be more terms added, but at this level, these are the only two terms that we're going to use to describe the numbers we see in this equation. I might also add in here, just to be clear, variables. Variables talk about what are not the numbers. So, when it comes to coefficients, let's start with this variables. When we look up here at 3x plus 6 equals 9, there is one variable being used. That variable is x. So x is the only variable we see in this equation. But we do see three numbers: a 3, a 6, and a 9. Now, if that number is with the variable, it is in front of the variable, okay? If it is being multiplied to the variable, then we call it a coefficient. So in this equation, 3 is your coefficient. If there are numbers that do not contain variables, now, let's be clear. If we have terms, if these numbers in these terms do not contain variables, then we call them constants. So in the first term, we have a 3x that does contain a variable. That's why the 3 was a coefficient. For our second term, 6, there is no variable in this term, which means this 6 represents a constant. To separate it from the next term, I'm going to put a comma. This last term is a 9. Again, I see no variables in this term, so that means this 9 is also a constant. So as we look at this equation and we break it up, we see we have three terms. Our 3 is a coefficient, our 6 and our 9 are constants, and the variable in this equation is x. So now, let's look at a couple other examples. Okay, 2x minus 6 equals 6. 2x minus 6 equals 7. Now at first glance, you don't see any addition. Well, this is where you have to get comfortable with the idea of understanding that subtraction is a shortcut for addition. It's a shortcut used for adding negative numbers. So you actually have to begin thinking about this 2x minus 6 as actually 2x plus negative 6 equals 7. And once you do that, you can then see the three terms of this equation. So as I look at this, I see that my variables are x. My first term does contain a variable of x, which means the 2 is a coefficient. My second term is plus a negative 6, so the constant is actually negative 6. And the last term of 7 has no variables, so it is also a constant of 7. So hopefully this helps you see how to deal with these negative numbers. Okay, one last example. Okay, this is a long equation. And as we look through here, notice we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 terms. This equation has 6 terms. Now, if we were going to solve it, of course, we'd combine like terms and start to decrease the number of terms, but that's not what this problem's asking. In this case, we recognize that we have these 6 terms. What are the coefficients, the constants, and the variables? Now, the first thing I want to look at is we have 5x, negative 3x, and 4x. These all are terms that contain variables, but since all the variables are the same, this equation actually only has one variable of x. Now, as I look at these x variable terms, here I see the number associated with the 5x term is 5. Just like we saw in the last example, this is minus 3x, but we need to think about it as plus negative 3x, so that the coefficient is actually negative 3. And finally, we have our 4x term, which is a coefficient of 4. So there were actually 3 coefficients in this equation. Constants, as we go through, we look at the other terms. Here we have a 2. Here we have plus 7, so it's a 7. Here we have plus 8, so it's an 8. It's important you understand what are known as coefficients, constants, variables, and terms, because not only will your teachers use these vocabulary, these key terms, these vocabulary words while they talk and teach you in class, but books and other curriculum you use as you go through your levels of math will also use these in your directions and things like that. So it's important you take time to know and understand what these vocabulary words mean. Thank you for joining me for this session of Pokemon Professor Review. Watch the next video.